So I was finally able to see the long-awaited Damien Chazelle film, First Man. I've been very excited about this ever since La La Land came out, and he announced that the next movie he was going to do was a Neil Armstrong biopic with Ryan Gosling as Neil Armstrong. It's one of those movies that you feel like you've been hearing about forever, you've been hearing casting news forever, and sitting in the theater actually getting to see it was sort of that much more crazy because of how long you've been looking forward to it. And on top of that, it's been a consistent Oscar contender all year. I think most everyone has agreed that we're going to be seeing this film spread out amongst most categories. The talk of it was very strong. Some people, like to lean towards it's the worst of them, and by them I mean the three Damien Chazelle movies, but I'd like to preface this review by saying I think this movie is excellent. I think it is a masterfully crafted film that is just an experience. I think if I had to put it in a word, it really is. It's an experience for so many different reasons, and the people calling it the worst of his movies. And I guess if you really wanted me to rank them, sure, I guess it's third place. But it's the same thing as the people who rate the Cornetto trilogy. Like, why? They're all great movies. You can enjoy watching every single one. What's the point in downsizing one of them by saying it's not quite as good as the other two? Because this movie's damn near close. Sure, it's the only one I'd give a 9 out of 10 as opposed to a 10 out of 10. I do call La La Land and Whiplash 10 out of 10 movies, and I know La La Land has received a lot of backlash, whatever. I'll stand by my stances on that. But it's still a fantastic film for so many different reasons, and Damien Chazelle continues to prove he's a powerhouse of direction. What's interesting with this movie comparatively to his other two is you realize how differently he's directed all three of his movies. They all feel so different. They all look so different. They all play out in such a different fashion. It does make me want to watch all three back to back to back, because it's almost crazy that they're all directed by the same person. If the only way that I would have been able to tell was if this movie was somehow about jazz, and then I'd be like, okay, that's your recurring theme. But there's nothing of that nature in this movie. And Damien Chazelle's direction is sort of what made it for me. Because I kind of said this last week about A Star is Born too. My favorite element of this film is it does not feel like you're watching a movie, ever. For me, when I was sitting there and I was watching it, I was completely encapsulated by everything I was seeing. By the visual elements of it, by the character work, even the minuscule amount of dialogue, which is, in terms of like character work and actual dialogue scenes, anything that's not just like science shit, it's not that prominent. This is largely a visual film, and they portray a lot of imperative character moments and a lot of really imperative plot moments through smarter mediums, so that it's not just, you're being told everything. You're feeling everything more so than you're just receiving information. It plays out, and the way it's shot almost complements this. It almost feels like a documentary. There's a lot of Catherine Bigelow camera-esque stuff in here where, there are little zooms in the middle of the shot. The camera's always moving. There's very rarely anything that's still, and if the camera is still, there's always some kind of motion in the shot. There's never really anything that's not happening within the frame. But as a result of that, you almost get this documentary-esque kind of feel, and I really liked that for this movie. I think it really worked for that, because the tone of this, it's a very kind of gritty movie in a sense, and you feel every success. You feel every setback. You're really drawn into it from the beginning. Despite the fact that ultimately we all know how this movie ends, we all know that Neil Armstrong gets to the moon, you're still clenching your jaw waiting for him to get there, because there's a lot of stuff in this movie I did not know about story-wise, and I really like how the story plays out. I think that is also a very strong point of this movie, is how everything unfolds and where it all unfolds and how you're actually seeing that, because like I said, you do really feel it. There is one thing that's interesting. I know this is true. There's a shot in the trailer of Neil Armstrong's house burning down and his family outside and all that. That's not in the movie. I don't know why they cut it or what. Maybe it just felt wrong, but it's still, nevertheless, like, the story moves well, and it all complements character work, which I think is very strong. The stuff that happens in the beginning of this movie I was completely unaware of, and that's sort of where I want to move this into Ryan Gosling's performance, which is just stunning in my opinion. I think this is arguably the best of his career. He just puts on this very quiet, introverted performance, which was necessary because that's how Neil Armstrong was. But a lot of actors would take that character element, would take the fact that, okay, this guy doesn't talk a ton, this guy doesn't, you know, he's not an extrovert, he's not very big, he's not very flashy, whatever. And they would portray it in a bland fashion. They would just be a stick of wood, and they would not be interesting to watch. Instead, Ryan Gosling likes to, you can tell, consider what has happened to his character up until this point and how that impacts the discussion he's having or the discovery he's making, whatever it may be. You always feel that emotion in him. He's never empty. There is always something in his eyes, or there's something in his head, or in the way that he's holding himself up, or anything, the way he delivers a line, you always can feel a little something more in the way that he's delivering it. And I think that that's fascinating. I think that is the sign of a good performance. One where you completely lose an actor in that, because you're not watching Ryan Gosling in this movie. Ryan Gosling is far away from Neil Armstrong at this point. We used to know a very different Ryan Gosling, even in La La Land, which I don't think is like an amazing performance. I think he's good. But this is a really, really, really strong performance out of him. He's definitely going to be nominated. Claire Foy, I also think, will be nominated. She's very good. What works really well about her is she's got a great screen presence about her. She's not on screen as much as you'd expect her to be. She's definitely a supporting actress, and like I said, I think she'll be nominated because she's great. But every time she's on screen, you're sort of drawn to her. She manages to kind of fill it up and make sure that, you know, what she's saying is important. Because compared to Neil Armstrong, who isn't a very, you know, take charge, take power, you know, we're going to do it this way and this way and this way kind of guy, Claire Foy is more like that. She likes to take charge of the situation, and you really feel that out of her, and you really get that out of her. And the dynamic between her and Gosling is really, really strong, the way he's so on kind of the other side of the spectrum of her. She even talks at one point saying, you know, I married Neil Armstrong because I wanted a normal life. And you can see how she's dealing with the fact that that's not what she has right now. And she still manages to be strong while also having this vulnerability of, I don't want my husband to die in space, and I have 2 kids who need a father, you know, so she portrays that in an excellent fashion. And even the supporting cast, I think, is really, really good. Some of them aren't particularly given, like, really a character to play. Like, Kyle Chandler is good, but, you know, he doesn't have, like, a backstory or anything that makes us connect to him. He's just kind of the guy who's running it. But actors like Jason Clarke and Corey Stoll really embody their characters well, their traits very well. You understand them, you like them. Corey Stoll, you start out not really liking him, but he grows on you. And Jason Clarke, I think, is a great performance, and I think his character was written very well. What could have been a very cheesy character turned out to be a really well fleshed out and developed character. And that goes the same for, and then the kid from Almost Famous is also really good. But that goes, I wanted to touch a little bit on the writing itself, because one of my biggest concerns with the movie was Josh Singer writing it. I'm a little mixed on him in general and his talents. I think he's a good writer. He's an Oscar-winning writer, but he has a tendency to put some cheesy shit into his movies sometimes, some weird, out-of-place, corny dialogue. Look at The Post. And I did not know, that was absent from this movie. I actually think he did a very good job in the writing. The dialogue, like I said, you know, a lot of the really impactful dialogue occurs between Foy and Gosling, and then some of it between Gosling and his friends, and then a lot of it is just sciencey shit, but, you know, he manages to bring these characters to life. There's nothing out of character that he writes. It all makes sense. It's all important. It's all pivotal. He incorporates some really good comedy into this movie, too, that is nice because It's not a lighthearted movie by any sense. It's one that's relatively, I guess, gritty is sort of a word I could use for it. And the fact that it's shot on film and it's very grainy sort of adds to that, which I really liked. I liked the look of this movie a lot. But the writing complements that in a sense, but still manages to give you some moments of levity. I thought he did a really nice job, and I think he'll also get a nomination for screenplay. I think Chazelle will get a director nomination more than likely. I think that's maybe not, but picture nomination for sure. And then the technical elements of this movie are just immaculate. I mean, I'd love to know what the budget on this movie. It feels like this massive budget science fiction film because nothing ever looks fake. It all looks practical. I'd like to know what's practical and what's not. It all looks like models, kind of, and I don't know how they did the moon sequence, but that looks spectacular. All of the ship sequences are spectacular. The production design, the visual effects, the sound design, the cinematography, even the score, which isn't used all that often, it's all just fucking awesome. And I think that you could be looking at something like this year's Gravity because they like to give the technical awards to a movie if it's like also up for something like Best Picture. You know, if they already consider it to be that good, that means they consider those technical elements of it to be really good. So I think you could see this movie running away with a lot of those technical awards. I think visual effects, it could be a front runner. I think cinematography, even maybe production design. I thought that was all immaculate. I only have 2 complaints, and they're relatively minuscule. I mean, even movies I give 10 out of 10, I have little problems with, but usually I'll knock like a point if the problems bother me somewhat consistently, and these popped up a couple times. One is that, like I talked about earlier, how the camera's always moving and how I like that element of it. There are a couple of times where in the spaceship sequences, you know, when they're launching off or whatever, and the ship starts shaking, like the camera starts like shaking like that, like back and forth, and like it hurts. Like it makes your head hurt. I know they're trying to make it realistic, and I respect that element of it, and I appreciate that, and I think that's great. But by that same token, when you are making a movie, you are allowed certain little, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. Like, you can take certain things for granted. You're allowed to change things for the sake of it being a movie. You know, like in Bourne, when they do shaky cam, you can still see what's going on. And I know the astronauts probably couldn't see what was going on in those actual moments. But as a film audience, I'd like to see what's going on just a little bit, personally. And if I couldn't see what's happening, that's fine. It's just my head, I could feel it like pulsating a couple times. It goes a little too far. A little bit. Every now and then, it's a little too much. The other thing is certain elements of pacing. I don't want to say it gets boring, because that's not what I mean. I mean that sometimes I don't think certain things that happen are set up enough. Some events just kind of happen, and it's like, oh, okay. It's a little jarring how quickly you jump into certain scenes and certain points of the plot, which is unusual because of how long the movie is. But I still managed to feel that a couple times. I was like, oh, we're already doing... They just talked about and now we're... Okay, great. Like, I'd almost like to see Claire Foy's reaction to it sometimes. You know, cut back to her once and see how she reacts to it. I don't know, just a little something that doesn't make it feel so abrupt when it actually happens. And I guess that's kind of a writing thing, but it didn't bother me that much. It was just a couple of scenes where I noticed it. But overall, this is definitely a movie to get out and see. If you're a Damien Chazelle fan, he does not let you down. If you're looking to see Oscar movies, this one's going to be everywhere. And if you just want to see a great movie, go see it. I saw Bad Times at the El Royale as well. This movie is a little bit better. Not a little bit. It's better than that. I liked Bad Times at the El Royale, but I loved this. I have to see it again. I saw it really late at night. I'd like to see it in kind of my right mindset and see what I'd end up giving it. Right now, I'd throw it a 9 out of 10, 4.5 stars. I would like to see, though, in the middle of the day, when I'm fully awake, what I actually think of it. So, that's it for this video. Let me know what you guys thought of First Man in the comments below. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. More Oscar videos coming very soon. We're right in the heart of the season. It's very exciting. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.